raise high one more time the tattered standard of the fall. Hello, MSB Moores, and today, which is more like last week, I have finished the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by completing The Crippled God, the final book, the 10-book behemoth that is the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. I will get this out of the way right now. It is the best series I've ever read. They are the 10 best books I have ever read. If you were to ask me to make a top 10 list in no particular order of my favorite fantasy books that I've ever read, in no particular order, it would go Gardens of the Moon, Dead House Gates, Memories of Ice, House of Chains, Midnight Tides, The Bone Hunters, Reaper's Gale, Toll the Hounds, Dust of Dreams, and The Crippled God. Bar none, it's not even close. I really like Stormlight, and I read it years ago, and it's what got me back into reading. But the Malazan Book of the Fallen is just so incredibly good. I mean, I there's a reason it has a cult following among those who have finished it and started reading it and read it. And I can't believe I'm done after so many years. It's taken me 6, maybe more years to finish this series. And as far as I can tell from in-universe texts and guesstimating, that's about how long the period of time that this series takes place. Uh, in case you're wondering, the way I figured that is not counting in like flashback scenes or anything like the flashback of Gardens of the Moon or the prologue of Memories of Ice. Otherwise, the series takes hundreds of thousands of years. The beginning of Gardens of the Moon come to well, Memories of Ice takes place right after Gardens of the Moon at the same time as Dead House Gates, and that is when Hatan and Krupe meet up, and Hatan gets pregnant, and then by Dust of Dreams, the Crippled God, her children are like 5 years old, around talking age, so it's about a 6 year gap, I'd say. I mean, I think from Gardens of the Moon to the ending of Midnight, or not Midnight Tide, sorry, to the ending of Memories of Ice was probably like a year long period. So, a little bit of time there. So, 6, give or take years. That was my guess. And that's how long it took me to read it. So, it gives a cool way of viewing the series because I feel like I have been enduring these events almost at the same pace. Although I kind of hesitate to say that because I read Gardens of the Moon years ago over the course of one whole summer, and then I read Dead House Gates year later, Memories of Ice year and a half later, and then in the last 8 months or so, I've read from Midnight Tides to The Crippled Gods. So really, most of it happened in about a year for me. But it feels like much longer than that. I mean, it's such a long series. I mean, I don't think anybody's debating that Malazan's short, but having finally completed it, I think I can, or since I've given it a little bit of time to marinate, I figured I would finally make a video about my thoughts on The Crippled God, the ending of the series. I'll probably include some stuff from Dust of Dreams since I didn't make a video on Dust of Dreams because Dust of Dreams sort of is an incomplete book, per everybody that's I've seen talk about it, even Steven Erikson. And it's really just the first half of The Crippled God, or the Dust of the Dreams of the Crippled God, if you will. Um, so this is obviously going to be full spoilers for the entirety of the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I've been waiting to say that for a very long time now. So happy I could finally say that and mean it. I've actually read the whole thing. I'm elated. I'm ridiculously happy that I'm done the series, but also a little sad because it was such a good journey. And without jumping the gun a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about a thing Dead Smell says towards the end, where he says he doesn't want it to end. He just wants to keep hearing Throat Slitter laugh, that high pitched laugh that he has. He doesn't want it to end, and neither did I. But all things must come to a close. The page before us must blur. An age is done, as they say. Um, sort of unrelated, but you'll see that I have a kind of a ponytail going on, and there's two reasons for this. The first one, which is the real reason, is that I wanted my hair out of my face for this video. The second reason, I feel like Fisher Keltath right now. But all right, barring all the facetious jokes aside, to actually get into the Crippled God and Dust of Dreams, I made a little list of talking points. This is the 2.0 script, and well, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. But I not them first. The first thing that I'll talk about is a general thing is these final two books and the Crippled God in specific have had some of my favorite plot lines that have been introduced and progressed throughout the series. If I were to name three specific plot lines, it would be the snake. The snake, one of my favorite plot lines throughout the series. I have gathered that the general disposition of fans of the series is that the snake isn't the most beloved of plot lines, but it was one of the most emotionally impactful and important in the series for me. The snake was just, I mean, one of, if not the saddest plotline to read throughout the series, but definitely one of my favorites. The second would be the Kachin Shamal plotline, and I made a video on that right before I had to go on a small sabbatical, but I think I'm using that word right, a small break or a vacation, sort of, not really, but uh I made a video about them, so obviously I really enjoyed that plot line, and I really enjoyed how that progressed. And that's more of a DoD plot line. It still progresses in the Crippled God ever so slightly, especially towards one of the final vignettes of the final chapter, but it's largely finished by the end of DoD. That's sort of when people say DoD has no conclusion and it just sort of stops abruptly, they're wrong. There's conclusions, and the could change them all are one of those conclusions. What have their story arc, and then the third is the Shake plotline, and very specifically Yed and Derrig, but the Shake as a whole. And there's some other stuff about that that I'll get into as the video progresses. But to start off, I will go all the way back to the prologue of DoD, where we see Heberic Ghost Hands, Heberic Light Touched, or Light Touch, and the Change Shamal, as well as the beginning of the Snake. And I have to say, as a cold open for the Snake, or any of the books, it is just so. I mean, it's definitely the definition of in Medeus Ray. We can't even get away from that towards the very finale of the series, because that is the final prologue. Since the Crippled God doesn't have a prologue because it's one book really. Um, but the Snake plotline throughout these two books blew me away with just how impactful it was. I mean, to say that it makes you want to weep, I don't think would be an understatement. It is just pure, undiluted suffering of children, which is just the worst thing you could ever imagine. And it's definitely one hell of a way to introduce the Forkwall sale. Even though they don't directly appear in that prologue, they mention that they're running away from the quitters who speak words and tell you to die, and when they tell you to die, you die. And they call them Quisitors because or quitters because they can't figure out what their real name is. But then, if you're looking at the dramatis personae before the book list of characters, under the Forkwall Sale section, there's the lawful Inquisitors. So you gather that it's the Forkwall Sale that are doing this. But the snake just as it continued to progress, it just got worse and worse, honestly. I mean, already to start, these children are emaciated, they're starving, they're dehydrated. I think the oldest one is Rut, and he's only like what 14, 15 years old, and he's leading thousands of children to go across a desert called the Glass Desert that they mention cuts their feet up just to walk through it. They mention that they have to drink out of random mud flats that they find, and some of the children are so far gone into the depths of dehydration and starvation that just drinking this water is too much for their small, emaciated bodies to handle, and they just collapse right then and there. And they also mention that the water is poisonous. I'm it's poisonous. And then after that, the first days of the shard commences of the shards, which we come to find out are man-eating locusts, which are really a insanely huge diverse swarm. That's really the elder god that was the god of the Forkroll Sail. We find out come the end of the Crippled God, which is a very good way to round out what that was, because I was really wondering too. I'm like, what are these locusts? Is this just what this land is? But that plot line just, I mean, it was so sad, and I think it's a very good uh apt way of introducing what the Forkroll Sale were uh in this finale, since they're kind of the big baddies of the ending of the series, them and the Ticely Ocean. Um and I guess the Naruk were kind of a part of that conglomerate, but obviously they were dealt with at the end of Dust of Dreams. Um but by the time that the snake kept continuing, and Badal's poems and the way that Badal deals with the snake and deals with how it is. I mean, he just hammers in heartbreak after heartbreak with some of the stuff that these children are saying, especially Badal. There's one scene where Badal, I forget if it's in Dust of Dreams or the Crippled God, but Badal reflects on how it's terrible that they're children that are dying. And the fact that it's a child who can realize how bad how terrible it is that they're suffering. I mean, obviously anybody's going to think that them suffering is terrible. But the fact that she is able to then go further than that and say it's not only terrible that we are suffering in general, it's terrible because we're children suffering, because the world failed us. It's the adults that failed us. And I think it's Fiddler who says that this was your answer, Colance. This was your answer for your children. And he says that if he could get there in time, he would have killed every single one of them for what they've done. And it was just horrible. And then Badal, everything to do with the snake and Badal and her poems was also very. It ties into how the Fork Sale were introduced, because one of the I think it's completely intentional is the Forkroll Sale's main means of or the way that their magic works is through words. And what could be more apt for a book series, a thing that's completely made up of words? Obviously, it talks about other things like your senses. I mean, words describe your senses. But for the finale to have so much to do with words and what they mean and what they can do was very, I think, apt for the series for a book series in general, and for the Malazan Book of the Fallen especially. And Badal's poems were, I don't remember them all very well, but they had a lot of impact, I think, onto that specific plotline and onto the book in general. Um, and some of the stuff, I mean, to deal with that horror element, time and time again, there's a moment where Badal is sitting talking to Sadik, and Badal is seemingly losing a little bit of hope before they find Akarius. And she looks down at Sadik, who's curled up beside her trying to sleep, and all she can think is, I want to eat his hands. That's how starved these children are, is that they're cannibalizing each other. And she says a line to Fiddler towards the end, or maybe it's the adjunct or just the bone hunters in general, and they ask her essentially how they survived so long in the glass desert, walking across from Colance. And she shrugs and she says, where there's no food, there are shards. Where there's no water, there are dead children." Which is unbelievably horrifying when you really think of the implication, especially for the bone hunters who, unlike us, have not witnessed all of these events. They can only imagine how, I mean, it's horrible the way we read it as well, but the bone hunters have no knowledge of what had happened. And then all of a sudden they're presented with this thousands of children that have suffered an excruciating amount. Children that are at times 10 years or younger. And there's also some disturbing things that the children do with one another that's also just incredibly messed up, is how I'll put it. It's really messed up. Um, but I really enjoyed those themes that I brought about we have to do more for the next generation, for our children, for the children of humans in general, of humanity. And it really tied in very well with the bone hunters at the end, in two different ways. One with what the bone hunters were doing in the first place, as well as the whole concept of the bone hunters being the unwitnessed. Because think about the bone hunters, they're unwitnessed, but there's a lot of people who know about them. There's the Letheri, the Malazan Empire might not know what they've gone to do, but the Lether Empire definitely knows, as well as the Volcando Kingdom. Even though they're kind of attaches to them, the Kundral Burn Tears, um, the Barcast, who are attached to the Evertine legions of the Volcando Kingdom, or Volcando Kingdom, not the Volcando Kingdom. It's just Volcando Kingdom. Um, but they as much as they are unwitnessed, they are in a weird way witnessed by a lot of people and by themselves. But these children truly were unwitnessed. Nobody knew about them except for the Inquisitors who just wanted to kill them. The Forquerel Sale. I think it's Badal who even thinks to herself that if the Inquisitors found out about the Chalmanagal, even though they knew, she didn't know at this time, she says if they found it out, they would chase them down and kill every last one of them. And it's really horrifying because it really hammers in how terrible the Forquerel Sales ideologies on justice were, because their sense of justice is killing thousands of children and thinking, oh, the impunity of these children to even attempt to survive getting across the glass desert. Um, but I'll get into more about them when I start talking about the bone hunters towards the end. I already spoke a little bit about the Forquerel Sale. We'll definitely get to the Crippled God. But the Elder Gods, oh my. The Elder Gods plotline was very interesting throughout the entire run of these two books, especially with the Errant. Um, the Errant's whole thing, he keeps the empty throne empty because he stands behind it. Because where does the power really lie? If you're on the throne, you have restrictions, but you still have power. And the Errant realizes this, and so he keeps the throne empty and stands behind it, manipulating everything. He is really the Opon of the Elder Gods, if you think about it. Uh, which actually did raise a little bit of confusion in me at first, because I had assumed that Opon had just come about and then, they replaced the Errant in the main world. And then it's found out that such a Lath is the one who created Opon. They're his children, which directly undermines the Errant. But then beyond this, not only is the Errant sort of like a trickster god of his time, the prod and pull, the prod and push, or no, yeah, prod and pull, of the Elder Gods, but he's also the master of the tiles. So he takes up two positions, which definitely shows how overzealous he was as an Elder God. But his whole plot line and the conflict he comes into with Cecil Lath, even though they never actually duke it out or even directly hinder one another, was very cool throughout the series. And it really builds on these ideas that are built throughout the entire series of how the new is a lot more powerful than the old. That's built even more at one point when I believe it's Quickben and Kalam Mekhar end up uh, going up to an enemy commander at one point, and they say this is how war is going to be fought from now on, because they absolutely decimate the opponents with Moranth munitions, which are, essentially grenades, granados of all various kinds, missiles, uh, that deal catastrophic mage levels of damage, but can be used by the average soldier. and they basically say this is how the world is now. This is how war is going to be fought. It's a lot bloodier. It's a lot more impersonal. This is how it is, and if you don't adapt, you're gonna lose. And it really builds on those themes there that have been going throughout the entire series. I mean, the whole concept of Moranth munitions being in this fantasy world definitely pushes that whole idea forward. And it's one of the reasons that the Malazan Empire is so successful. They take advantage of all these resources. Um, but I really enjoyed the Elder Gods' plot line and then that conflict where the errant is basically like, oh, well, I want to stay. I like the stagnation of being, a powerful elder god that people give bloody worship to. But I also like that I don't have any direct worshippers to, confine me to anything. But everybody knows me, so I mean, he has worshippers, but he doesn't have like a high priestess or a high priest or anything. And the one that he does get, he immediately kills because he doesn't it binds him, and we definitely see that with some comments by Mail in previous books where he's like, my worshippers are trying to stop me. I will have my way. It's my war and it's my power. um which is all very interesting. Even the magic, to cut back a little bit, goes is the same as technology in this world, where it's always evolving. They mentioned that the tiles and the holds are a much older version of what the warrens and the deck of dragons are, but the warrens and the deck of dragons are much crisper, more refined, less close to chaos, whereas the tiles and the holds are very close to chaos and they're a lot more unpredictable and primordial in their power. Um, but, you know, the fact that the holds are only used on this one continent, whereas the Warrens have essentially taken over magic everywhere else in the world, shows how much stronger they are, in my opinion, and how the new really overtakes the old. And the Errants fight against this, whereas Setchel La has the opposite, where he's like, our time is coming to a close. There's no point trying to prolong it. It was a very interesting dynamic between those two. Kilmandaros just being bloodthirsty was also very nice. I mean, she's just kind of a funny elder god in the end. And I like how she just absolutely despises the Elaine to the point where mentioning it in front of her can drive her into a killing frenzy. I mean, that's just funny. Um, Moving over to the Elaine, that whole plot line was also very interesting throughout this book because it's got the whole connotations with the Elaine are what magic comes from, and they're also the closest thing to chaos. Big thing throughout the series with Soul Taken and Elaine is that their blood is tainted with the Elaine's blood, which is chaos itself. Kind of the opposite of Cruel's. Cruel's is like it's capillaries with his blood flowing, and chaos is what surrounds him. It's the opposite of it in essence. And the whole concept of Starval Demoline is finally opening the Elite will come. They will destroy everything was very interesting. Also built upon some themes with the Kachane Naruk that I had and the Kachane Shamal that I had previously spoken about in a previous video about the Kachane Shamal, that previous video. Um, Also, dragons are just badass. I mean, they're just cool. I mean, not saying that every fantasy needs dragons, and Malazan definitely uses them much more seldom than most fantasy series, I'd argue. But damn, are they cool. I mean, when Malazan dragons show up, you just know it's going to be a bloodbath and it's going to be some of the coolest scenes you've ever seen, especially with Korabas. I mean, disregarding all the thematic stuff of Korabas, I mean, she's just this absolutely massive dragon that wherever she goes, kills everything in sight. I mean, that's just cool. I mean, let's not forget that this series is for entertainment purposes as well. And let me say, every scene with Korabas, all like three of them, I was entertained thoroughly. Um, uh, with the Elder Gods, I was quite interested in how the Errant sort of nudges everything in specific ways. He nudges the Naruk over to the Bone Hunters, and into the path of the Kachan Shamal, and he nudges the uh trying to or he frees Korabas to sort of nudge everything in the proper direction. But the Elite were really cool, and I was kind of mad that we didn't actually get to see TM fully manifest. The fact that she actually has multiple heads like Tiamat from Dungeons and Dragons was a really cool detail I wasn't expecting. I mean, the primordial dragon, I guess, the mother of all dragons, the elder goddess of the dragons. I mean, it was so cool. Um, Let me see here. Moving on to the Talon Inis. Everything with Onost Ulan throughout these books was just heartbreaking. I mean, from what happened in DOD to his family as well as to him, the fact that Olar Ethel brought him back. I mean, screw you, Olar Ethel. I mean, let's be real. Does anybody like Olar Ethel? I don't think so. Cool Draco Lich, but screw her. Um, Let me see here. Oh, but his whole journey with the other Talon MS and some of the stuff that comes about with their development with the whole idea of this second ritual that no one knew about was extraordinarily interesting, especially since it went against everything about what the ritual was for in the first place. The ritual for the Talon en masse was so that they could wage eternal war against the Jaghut, and because they were being hunted to extinction themselves. Humans were coming into the world and they were ending it. But his immediate disposition when waking up, which is, I'm just going to fend off Olar Ethel and I'm going to get revenge for my wife and my children and for myself, was really sad to see, honestly. After everything that Tula tried to do with the Barcast, tell them that there's no reason to fight senseless war, that there is no reason that first of all, they're not going to beat the Kachane Uruk. He knew about them, or he thought they were the Kachane Shamal, or maybe he knew they were the Kachane Uruk. And he basically said, "Yeah, we're not winning this war no matter what. They will wipe us out." And the Barcasts were like, "Bullshit. That's not what's going to happen. We're going to absolutely decimate them in war." Um, I think the Kachane Naruk would have curb stomped the Barcast for reference. So they were definitely wrong about that. Um, it was definitely cool to see him take that approach and then for it to get thrust right back in his face. And it makes his sacrifice at the end all the more sad because he sacrificed himself to save Barcast lives because he knew that they would have that Marl Ebb would have killed all of them as well. And so he's like, "Quick, kill me, and then make a start showboasting about it that you killed me." And it was honestly really terrible. I have to go into the Barcast very slightly because one of my favorite scenes in the series happened with the Senin and their evolution, which is also part of what makes the Talana Mass's return even sadder. And I spoke about this in the Change Small video because it had to do with the Talon MS and the Barcast as well. And a conversation which Silchas Ruin had with Rodalal or Riyad Elise. The Senin sort of have this thing go on where their leaders start trying to do the right thing, and I don't quite remember all of their names, but they start dying because of it, trying to do the right thing. And then finally there is I could not tell you his name precisely off the top of my head. He was the final leader of the Senin. Um, I'm pretty sure that he's in the appendix. If I go to the section on the Barcast, nope, he is not even listed here, even though this is part of the DoD included list. Um, he was the final leader of the Senin, and he ends up right before this final battle with the Akanai. He turns to the Senin Whiteface and he just raises his sword and he goes, "Not this enemy, not this war." And he slams his scabbard shut, hoping that they'll listen to him. And then all of a sudden, swords go into sheaths and they move out. One of the best redemption scenes in the entire series for me. And it makes what happens with Onos to Ulan all the more sad. But especially with kind of what he enforces. I shouldn't say enforce. I mean, he does technically enforce at a certain point on the Talon MS that end up joining him. But you also have to think about what those MS were doing because they choose to follow him thinking, oh, well, I can leave at any time. I don't even want to follow this guy. I'm just going to keep moving. He's the first sword. He's legendary among us. And then, he gives them the option. You can leave. You don't have to follow me. I don't even want followers. And then once it comes time for, to do what must be done for his own thing, he actually enforces his will upon them and they are powerless before it. First of all, Tool's a badass. Second of all, it was so sad, especially with the parallels that it drew with the K'chain Naruk and the Barghast and the K'chain Shamal and all them, and the words of Silchas Ruin about aggression versus or offensive aggression versus defensive aggression, and then I think it's Cult Erminal or one of the new female Talon Imas says the Talon Imas are reborn into this world as the slayers of children. And those words that final Senin war chief had for him as well was, "We avenged you. We did not fight the war." And then they're still getting cut down. He sees that they're not getting mercy, and he just says, "Please spare the children. The children are innocent, and even they are not spared." And it was so sad, and it really is upsetting for Tool's character. I mean, you could say that he sort of had a happy ending, but you also got to think about what had happened, and it's just terrible. But I mean, you also got to think, can you blame his anger at the same time for what they did to him, for what they did to his wife? Especially for what they did to his wife. I mean, the hobbling was just, um, you know, I didn't have to stop reading per se, but it did leave a very, very bad taste in my mouth having to read that section. And I know a lot of people struggle to even get through that part of the book because it's just horrible. It's just horrible. I mean, there's no other words to describe it. But their plot line was, especially towards the end, with the words that he has with Stormy and Gessler, were simply amazing. I mean, the words that he has for him regarding the whole idea of what they're fighting for, what the whole point of fighting for is. And I mean, I forget if it's Stormy or Gessler. I believe it's Stormy is like, all right, you're just gonna follow us because you're indebted to the Emperor, or you because you had to follow the Emperor because he sat on the first throne. Is that why you're gonna follow us? Because that's a dumb reason to follow us. And he's like, well, what's the reason you're doing this for? And he's like, send someone home, the crippled god home. And I'll get to the crippled god. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm sure that's going to be at least like a 20 minute section just on him. But, you know, the combination of all of that in the end was definitely a redemption of the Talon MS. And then them being reborn again outside of the refugium, what with the death of Fenner was, I mean, that's just icing on the cake. Because even though it led to a lot of them dying, their words of saying that having this final gift of life after so long being dead was better than anything they could have ever hoped for. And it really reminds me of that moment with Itkovian, and it reminds me of when Onrak first walked into the refugium. And it was simply amazing. I mean, I was I was just simply amazed by the arc that the Talanimas have throughout this entire series, and them fighting side by side with the 14, the Jaghut, was So good. There were a few words, I don't know who spoke them, but they, and I believe it might have been Hood, it might have been one of the 14 of the Jaghut, mentions that all of the elder races are here. The K'chain Shamal, the Jaghut, the Fork Sale, and the Talon MS. And then they mention that they are happy that it's the K'chain Shamal, the Jaghut, and the Talon MS, all who had fought each other at one point, are working together to fight against the lawful Inquisitors, the Fork Sale. Um, I'll go straight into this just because I'm already talking about Jaghut and everything. Hood is the best depiction of a god of death that I've seen in anything. Not that I've seen a whole lot, but I mean, his actions until the Hounds, up until, these final moments where he's just, I mean, but he bit a Fork Sale's face off and was just like, I don't much like Fork Sale. I remember reading that and I was like, what is happening right now? I mean, I'm using the word a lot right now, but complete badass. You know, also really makes you think. I mean, what with the whole ideas of evolution throughout the series, even with humans, humans coming about from evolution in the Malazan world from the Aerosol and the Talana mass, and then the humans came. Um, you got to think of like biological functions from time to time, especially with Kachin Shamal and how they work. Um, you think about the Jagdhunt, and it's like, why do they even have tusks? I mean, there is that just like, a cool affectation that they have? And then it's like, no, no, they have the tusks for a reason. They're meant to fight with their mouths. And he just straight up bit that Fork Sale's face clean off. And I remember just thinking, wow, that is nuts. Um, but his actions towards this book where really, have that final culmination with the 14, where they finally, take him back as their leader since he's no longer the god of death and he's passed that torch on to the bridge burners. And he is talking with, or, he goes up and he sees calm, or it might not be calm. It might, no, it's a serenity or diligence, diligence. And he just, picks her up by the shoulders and starts slamming her into the ground over and over and says, I have had enough of your justice. And, that's how I read it in my mind. I read it as him going, in between ragged breaths. And it's just such a good culmination of all the plans that Hood and Animander Rake had set in place, where they're just like, we are done with all these notions of justice that all these people have. The Naruk think that they have the right to exterminate the K'chain Shamal and the dragons for the fact that they were worshipped by the K'chain Shamal and because the K'chain Shamal enslaved them generations ago. They're like, oh, well, we can kill whatever we want now. The Tais Leosian want to march upon darkness and bring light to everywhere they go, and they want to bring their own justice to filthy humans and everybody else. They're allied with the Fork Sale, who want to just wipe humans and other intelligent life forms off the face of the Malazan world. And the fork roll sales reason is definitely a strange one because at first you think it comes from it's presented as coming from a position of not only superiority but environmentalism, where it's like because they're allied with the wolves of winter, Fanderay and Tog, or Tog and Fanderay. Um, and there's this whole idea that it's like, oh well, they've destroyed the world and they do is fight wars and yada this yada that. But then Ganus Paran actually talks with one of the Tais Leosian, and he basically reveals the conceits that they have in their logic, which is essentially where the Fork sales like think about what you do to animals, what you do to cattle. You keep them and breed them for captivity just to kill them, and you hunt things to extinction and you do all this and that this and it's cruel. And then and then she's like, you think you have this right. And then Ganos basically is like, well, now hang on a minute. that's exactly what you're doing. You're thinking you're better than us, so you have the right to do it. You think that you have the ultimate say on what justice is in the world, so you can come and just kill all of us that you want. And the fork roll sale doesn't really have a comeback to this, and it's just like, oh, well, you don't understand what true justice is. I'm done talking to you now. It's really the quintessential idea of arguing with somebody and then they don't have a comeback and they're like, well, no, you're just wrong. You just don't understand. Oh, well, that's not really a reason. Why? It just isn't. That's very much what the fork roll sale were. And I'm very glad that conversation was so satisfying to me because it really is just the ultimate way of looking at the fork roll sale and just saying, you're babies. You're just babies. You're just babies whining about something that you didn't like for whatever reason, and then, you don't have your way, so you're gonna whine and cry about it. And I was so happy that we finally got a villain in the series that is just that culmination of whiny crybaby. We've had him before, but man, I was happy that the fork roll sale ended up having that one singular moment where they're like that. Very satisfying. To me, anyway. Uh, a plot line that was this plot line ties into numerous. What's that? Oh, my dog's rolling over on the couch. I guess she's overheated. It's hot this summer. It's a hot summer, just like in Darajistan. But as it moves into summer. But a plot line that was very it tied into a lot of other plot lines was the journey with Torrent of the All, um, as well as the remaining members of the Trigal Trade Guild, Gruntle and Mappo, traveling and finding Setok, and then of the the children of Hetan and technically Krupe, but Onos to Ulan. Was a plot line that, well, first of all, with the children, that very much goes into the whole idea of the unwitnessed of the children, the fact that they're cast away, they're to the wayside, they're not dealt with as much, as well as the whole idea of um we don't do enough for them. And it worked into a couple other character arcs very well. I specifically really liked how it combined into Mappo's, where you know his one obsession and his one goal is to get back to Ikariam, and so he has to make this choice. He abandons the children or he abandons Ikariam, and then he chooses to abandon the children to Olar Ethel, and so he goes off with in his search for Ikariam. And his plot line, that just was one of the saddest in the series. Made me completely distraught by the end. The fact that he was unable to he got to Ikariam finally, but he wasn't actually able to save him from Calm. He does get saved by Calm, which was nice, but he's not actually able to do anything more was tragic in the most epic of senses. And I mean, that final line that he has, which is, my friend, I am sorry. As well as a lot of the reflections that he has in Icarius, uh, which was one of the coolest scenes in the series, in my opinion, where the light in Icarius is able to show you stuff that's already happened. It traps moments from the past, and it traps what the children were doing. And somehow Badal is having a conversation with Sadik that happened earlier in the book that we only got parts of that didn't make any sense. And then Sadik is confused as well, and she's like, he's heard enough. The one named Mappo. And Mappo's like horrified. He's like, what? I mean, talk about foreshadowing, talk about things coming full circle, and talk about just insane plot arcs. I mean, that was just great. But moving back to the other arc, Torrent became one of my favorite characters in the series throughout these books. Um, from his moments in Reaper's Gale, where he starts off as just, another generic, oh, I'm super proud all warrior. I really like what Red Mask is doing. I don't like this outsider named Talk. And then it keeps going, and then he starts to realize he's like, wow, Red Mask wasn't all he was made up to be. Talk is a man with some integrity, and I actually respect him quite a bit, and I will save his works. And then going, I need to just protect the kids. And then in Dust of Dreams, seeing the remnants of the All, their legacy, their children, just getting assimilated into barcast culture, and they're going to get diluted, and they're just going to turn into those. They're just going to become barcasts, seeing the end of his culture. And he has all these struggles with it at first, and he spends a lot of his days just getting hammered inside of a tent, not knowing what to do. And then he finally, he regrets a lot about what had happened, and he thinks a lot about what had happened with Talk and how he felt about Talk towards the end. And he comes to these final conclusions about what he's going to do with the rest of his life. And then, he sets out on his own path, on his own journey. And he has a cool little journey with Setok. And he has a very good scene with her where Setok is essentially chastising the Barcast for the way that their society is. And they're arguing with back and forth. And he essentially just goes, um, come with me. You don't have to stay among these barbarians any longer. Don't stay among these people. They don't want you. They're going to hurt you. They don't deserve you. They don't deserve the words that you're even giving them. And Torrent finding these children and then dedicating the rest of his time to being with them, and then also chastising the rest of the group for abandoning the children was amazing. And he just shot up to being one of my favorite characters. And I mean, he had some very interesting scenes too. And there was one scene with Olar Ethel when they're going along the plains, and then suddenly she's like, "We're in a different warren, but it's an unpredictable warren." I forget if it was Shadow, crawled, uh, Emerlon, or if it was just a different warning. And she's like, "Careful, you could wander into a different warren at any time, and I'm not going to come and save you." And he actually does by mistake. But it's not just any ward. It's the dreams of one magnanimous croupe of fair Dargistan. And it was such a good scene that Croupe should randomly appear. He has a few words with him, and then he says, I wouldn't just leave my children without anything to defend them, so take these arrows. And it was a perfect parallel in the end with how, you know, Talk's final moments are him having the craziest sniper shots of his life to save some children, the children of the All, and that's how he ends up dying. And Torrent's final moments are him shooting Olar Ethel to save the children, and then thinking to himself, "You see that, Talk?" Or something along those lines, and then him, falling into the crevice. He's also an unwitnessed, in my opinion. Um, I like to think that even though it wasn't shown, he Talk greeted him at Death's Gates with the bridge burners. Uh, I shouldn't say with the bridge burners, as a bridge burner. Talk the Younger's plot throughout the series was amazing. His Talk the Younger's not arc, but actions in these final books, from being forced to do things that he hates, that he vehemently is just so incredibly angry about, and he is pissed at Olar Ethel. And then he sees the Talana mass, and then they become human, and he's so happy for Talk. And then he turns to Whiskey Jack and he begs him. He's begging him. He's like, please, I know I was never a bridge burner, but as a fellow Malazan, you must save him. You cannot let him die. And then Whiskey Jack, with his dead face, just turns to him all casual like and says, in this almost relaxed, almost like why are you freaking out, man voice, he says, Talk the Younger. Did you ever think we would say no? And one final time, the bridge burners charged to do battle. Oh my gosh, man, it was one of the best just like through lines of the entire series. The Bridge Burners are one of the most legendary groups of the entire series. I will never get over how incredible the Bridge Burners were, and especially with some stuff that ends up happening with Fiddler and Hedge at the very end of the series. I mean, I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But man, oh man, the bridge burners are the best, and Whiskey Jack getting a second finale was definitely not something I expected, but it's something that I very much enjoyed. And Corlat broke Corlat broke into a run. Amazing, absolutely amazing. But them being put in charge as the new Arbiters of Death, I couldn't think of any other better group. I mean, because a lot of the people going through Hood's Gates, probably the most common way people die, war. What are the bridge burners? People who did war their entire lives, and it's so fitting that the bridge burners were reunited all in death, and that they were able to stay together. And I couldn't think of people kinder nor more solid to be those that usher in the dead and not let them leave. Uh, you know, Special exception for Hatan and meddling in earthly affairs at the end of the series. But to talk a little bit about the ending of Dust of Dreams, just because I didn't make a video on it, and I really quickly want to talk about it. The day of the Naruk, the Kachane Naruk, or the Bone Hunters versus the Kachane Naruk. Oh my gosh, we spent this entire book just going, when are the Bone Hunters going to fight? When are the Bone Hunters going to fight? Every scene with the Bone Hunters was still absolutely amazing, and I loved all of the moments of them talking with one another and thinking about what they're even doing. And then finally, it's time for battle. We have these new bridge burners that Hedges created. We got all of the Marines, we got all the heavies, we got all the infantry, we got Briss's army on the side. We have the Evertine legions finally starting to make their way to the Bone Hunters. And suddenly a dark cloud forms, and they have to dig in, and they have to dig deep. And I mean, the Kachane Naruk were devastating. I mean, the back of the Crippled God base, the first lines of like the little blurb that explains what the book is about says, "Savaged by the Kachane Naruk, the Bone Hunters march for Kolance." Savaged is an apt word because they were basically being churned away in a grinding maw that was dinosaurs with magic and technology. And I mean, Keneb's death was probably like that hit me like a bullet, man. I mean, Keneb's been in it since Deadhouse Gates and or maybe House of Chains, but he was one of my favorite fists, and his whole journey throughout this book of basically having to lead the army himself because the adjunct will give them nothing, and he's depressed the entire time because he thinks his kid died. And I mean, who wouldn't be? I mean, he literally thinks that his adopted son has gone missing and died. And he's distraught beyond belief. And, you know, I think it makes it all the worse that his death was, quite frankly, pointless. He goes out to try and help Ruth and Good, who ends up surviving. And the description comes from Relico, I think, of or not Relico, of from Neller maybe, of or one of the more minor Marines, describing how he sees Keneb's torso just flip in the air. And I forget who else, but somebody immediately dies then, and their arm gets blown off by the Kachane Naruk's magic, their weird lightning nodes and lightning clubs. And it was just like, man, it was sad reading. Neller getting his entire throat punched through by shrapnel, and some other characters dying was just brutal. But I mean, there was some great moments in that battle too. I mean, you got to think Horab jumping over the line as most of the Marines have already been completely destroyed at this point, and it's finally time for the heavies to deal with it. And it just says, all of a sudden, a shout comes from the entire line of heavies, "Hail the Marines!" And then the heavies rose to meet them. And then all of a sudden, we go over to Briss Benedict, who's watching, and he's like, wait a minute, the Kachane Naruk, they're not advancing anymore. And he just thinks, by God, what caliber of soldiers are you, Bone Hunters? And he just can't even fathom that any human army could stop what they were witnessing. Only the Bone Hunters could do that. They had to dig deep for that one. The Marines and the Bone Hunters and the oh my God, and the heavies, dude, and the heavies. There were some great moments earlier in the book with the heavies. Specifically, I always love any scene where they start gossiping or they're like, "Ooh, where's Nefarious Bread?" Um, and I'll get to Nefarious Bread. He might get a 20-minute section all on his own later in the video, but but simply amazing. I mean, I was just absolutely blown away by this battle. And there was one other moment that really struck me in this battle, besides Hail the Marines, besides Keneb's death and the other deaths, and well, I guess what I'm about to talk about is a death, but besides Briss's reaction. And that is a moment where um Hedge is about to get blown up by an errant ray of lightning from the Kachin Naruk, and one of his new soldiers, previous Lethari indebted, nicknamed Sergeant Sunrise, or given the name Sergeant Sunrise in the new bridge burners that Hedge created, automatically made a Marine. This guy was, I think it's mentioned at the beginning of the book that you know, he was doing fairly well for himself, and then he decided to invest some stock in a construction company, which ended up being Bug's Construction. And, the economic collapse brought on by Tehel and Bug and Karis and Vikdat completely destroyed his life. His wife left him for someone else. He was left as an indebted. He's just like, well, I got nothing else to do. I'll join the army, and it gives him some backbone in his life. And it starts off kind of depressing where he gets a stupid nickname, but then you know one of the soldiers is like, "You can make whatever beginning in this life you want in the Bone Hunters. What name do you want?" And he's like, "Sunrise, Sergeant Sunrise," or he gets made sergeant after. And then Hedge is about to get blown up, and it says he tears every muscle in his back and his legs to jump in front of Hedge, and it says he was a bridge burner, or it's like he was a soldier, he was a bridge burner. He'd never stood taller, he'd never walked straighter. He was everything he had ever wanted to be, all because of Hedge. And then he thinks to himself, see me, sunrise. And then he turned into swirling dust. And we need to petition Fisher Keltath to make a poem. We got Lay of the Bridge Burners, we got Lay of Onos Tulan, we got Lay of Tak the Younger, I think. Uh we need Lay of um what's the word? We need Lay of Sergeant Sunrise is what we need. That's the poem we need. Uh and I'm pretty sure it's gonna be appearing in the third witness book, because I don't know if it's in the first or the second witness book, but it's definitely appearing in the third witness book. We're getting Lay of Sergeant Sunrise as an epigraph to a chapter. We have to. Um, but that death hit me like a truck, and that dude has like 3 scenes in that book, and I think that shows how well the writing is. It's just those few lines. He'd never stood taller, he'd never walked straighter. He was a soldier, he was a bridge burner, he was everything he had always wanted to be, all because of Hedge. I love Hedge. That Hedge, man. But moving on to the very next chapter, that's the most epic battle I think in the entire series, bar none. I mean, maybe the battle at the Spire might have been more epic, and Yigatan is pretty crazy. And I mean, Beak's sacrifice was nuts in Reaper's Gale, but the Kachane Shamal versus the Kachane Naruk, followed by Sin and Grub showing up out of nowhere, followed by Icarium floating a giant fortress over top, And then, having those crazy words like you bring death, you bring destruction, you bring the death of dreams. But I am Icarium, but I am Icarium life stealer, and I bring far worse. Oh my gosh. And then he basically causes a black hole in the middle of the battle that closes the rent. And then there's all the sky fortresses shooting lasers and magic at each other, and they're falling over. And or Ampalas rooted is now Ampalas uprooted. And there's 15 or like 30,000 or 15,000 Vegoth warriors and the crap ton of Kael hunters. And, there's still just the three Shigal assassins that don't really do much, including Guru. He does get hurt during the battle, but all of that was just absolutely insane. And Stormy and Gessler becoming the Mortal Sword and the Shield Anvil was a great way to really progress what they were. And I mean, that's the most epic cinematic thing in the series, I think. Especially at the end when the Sky Fortresses are all down and the portal's closed up by Icarium, basically spawning a black hole in the middle of this battle. All these just huge amounts of rock coming up from the ground and falling down, and sky fortresses going out of the air. And I mean, closing up that portal. It's just, I mean, thinking about it in my head, it was just, oh my. And then Sin and Grub's thing, it was the most epic battle in the series. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. I thought that was the end of Icarium, and I was kind of upset about it, but I mean, that was no other way to put it. And I mean, at the end, Stormy having that bloodlust where he's like, "Go slaughter," because he realizes that the bone hunters were eaten by the Kachane Naruk, and that's, oh my gosh. What a way to end a book. What a crazy way to end a book, not knowing the fate of the bone hunters. Did they actually survive? Were they able to escape? It's implied they were able to, but was that the bone hunters that left? But it was very sad to see that most of the Marines and the heavies were destroyed in that battle. And then, going forward, they have to go through the Glass Desert. And then we get the moment where the chain, not the chain, sorry, where Bottle ends up surviving. Bottle, by the way, in that final battle, when he's buried under all these Kachane Shamal or Kachane Naruk bodies, all these soldiers, and all of a sudden he starts, using his ability to, take over animals, and he starts taking over Lokwai rivals, and he makes them attack each other. He makes them attack the Kachane Naruk and everything, and he's jumping from soul to soul. Snatching them and just chaining them together, binding them all together to his own. And it mentions how it's shredding away his own soul and his own being. And he could feel himself slipping away, but, anything to help the battle, since he's buried under all these bodies. And that was such a crazy way to end that off because Bottle was one of my favorite Marines. And thinking that he's dead and the Bone Hunters thinking he was dead, that just, oh, man. Thank God for Quick Ben, man. Or, sorry, no. Is there any, thank Hood, I guess, that Quick Ben, figured that Bottle was his shaved knuckle in the hole. Uh, man, I was so happy that he survived, and then him and Ruth and Good making their way back to camp. I will say that that is one of the best moments in the entire series. Is um Bottle's reunion where, he just slips into the camp all sly like, and he, is trying to sit there while Fiddler's giving his whole speech now that he's Fist or Captain. And, he just looks up and he's like, Cuddle? And he's like, yeah. He's like, find him. He's out there somewhere. And Cuddle finds him, and all the rest of the Marines and the things that are back, they're all like, oh my gosh, he's alive. They're so happy. And, Cuddle goes over to him and he's like, "We knew you wasn't dead. There's no way you could have died." And he's like, "But you had us worried there for a second." Then he's like, "You know, Fiddler should be the one doing this, but he can't because he's got decorum and all this now, and he's got positions to live up to, and he's got you know all this stuff to live up to." And Bottle takes that in one way, and he's like, I know, position and stuff." And then Cuddle just he steps in and gives him a hard bear hug, and he says, "Welcome home, soldier." Breathes deep into his ear, and it was just like it shows the bond, the camaraderie, and the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the bone hunters. I mean, I think that really drives home what being some of the words Tavor has towards the end of the series about the bone hunters being unwitnessed, where they witness each other, and that's more than enough. And I think this is one of those moments that is so poignantly shows this off. Um, I've talked a little bit about the Bone Hunters and a little bit about a decent bit about some stuff that happened in DoD and a little bit about stuff that happened in the Crippled God. I'm going to split this up into a part one and a part two video, I think, because this is it's just now occurred to me this is probably going to take at least 2 hours to talk to. So, I will upload this first part and then tomorrow I will upload part two. Or maybe not tomorrow. Um, but within 2 days, I'll upload part two to this where I start talking about everything that I haven't talked about in this video, which will delve more into the Crippled God because I haven't even gotten to the Shake yet, and that'll take forever, and the Crippled God itself and everything to do with this book in general. But you know, to since this is the first part one, part two video I've made, I think an apt way of putting it is to say but this night, why, it is but half done, to quote Toll the Hound. But I hope that you enjoyed this first half of the discussion, or my discussion and thoughts upon finally finishing the series and on The Crippled God and Dust of Dreams a little bit. Um, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope you tune in for part two in a few days.